Yes. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Life is an Adventure with the Mancos Public Library. We usually do this in person, and it seems like a whole lot more fun, but we're learning to do things in a different way. And we've waited almost a year to have this fabulous woman with us today, Robin Brodsky. She's a rock climber, a backcountry skier, a mountaineer, a bicyclist, and I've come to learn a very wise woman from Durango, Colorado. She's traveled much of the world solo and on two wheels. Her blog, Freewheeling Femme, talks about some of her adventures. I highly recommend it. Robin, hello, welcome. Thank you
Hi,
for being here with us today.
thanks for having me.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions by way of introduction. When you were a little girl, did you see yourself traveling the world on a bicycle?
No. I mean, when I was little, I grew up in an area that was really full of adventure. I grew up near the beach on the East Coast, and we learned that we could walk there. It was a pretty healthy walk, but we could walk to the beach, and there was lots of woods behind the house. There was some creeks that emptied into Long Island Sound, and lots of woods. And we always had bicycles, and the bicycles were kind of like our key to adventure. And I'll say that my parents were avid travelers. I mean, we didn't do anything too adventurous, but my dad was a school teacher, so we would take off every summer and travel around the Northeast. In fact, we came out west a couple of times, which is a long way to go back in the 70s in a station wagon with no air conditioning. And then I think when I was about 14, that National Geographic came out with the article about Robin Davidson, who at 27 years old walked across Western Australia with 4 camels. And I was thoroughly intrigued by that. And that story kind of always stuck with me. And then she wrote a book about it years later, and then they made a movie and all that. But she was amazing. So she really inspired me, and that story. Eventually, I'd get to Australia years and years and years later.
Uh-huh. Well, it seems like bicycles have been a big theme. What led you to the path that you've taken as a solo biker who's virtually transversed the world?
Um, I think that has a lot to do with I don't know. Maybe I don't play well with others or something, or I just didn't want to wait around for other people to make up their mind, or try to make a plan. And because I'm not a very good planner, so I get a wild hair to go wherever, and I just go. I just go.
I love that
And
free spirit. Do you always travel alone?
yeah, for the most part. I mean, I've met a few other travelers along the way, and we maybe would spend a few days together on the road, but mostly I just travel at my own pace. Um, I mean, years ago when I was really young, I traveled before the bicycle. I traveled all over the world, and you just meet travelers. Back in those days, before everything was online, we just met people at hostels, and you'd hang out together, and you'd travel together, and then you'd go separate ways. And it was a bit more adventurous, I think, back then.
Mhm. Travel was
Yeah.
different back then for sure. So I'm sure you get asked a lot, and I'm going to ask you today, are you ever fearful being a woman traveling alone?
Absolutely. Um, I mean, I'm not fearful to the point of like, I'm not going anywhere. I mean, there's places in the world that I would not go alone, to be sure. Um, I know other women have, but I am pretty, I pay attention to other travelers and what their experience was. So that is the good thing about the internet. Um, and I do read the State Department travelers advisories. I don't always pay a lot of attention to them, but I've had a few sketchy moments, and I just really pay attention to my intuition, my gut. If something doesn't feel right, I don't do it. I don't go there. In fact, I shortened a trip. I was in South America for a while, and I just got really sketched out in RHODES, Peru, which is up in the Cordillera Blanca. I cycled from Lima up into the Andes, and I was in this beautiful little city, and I was going to cycle to Colombia. But there was something that was just nagging at me the whole time I was in RHODES, and I just couldn't shake it. And I ended up just taking a bus back to Lima and flying back to the States.
Yeah. That intuition thing, it's important.
Yeah, so I paid attention to that. There was some, with social media now, I'd have to say that I'm a member of various travel pages, specifically women's bikepacking pages, international travelers pages, and stories crop up every now and again of somebody who disappeared. Sadly, when I was in RHODES, there was a story of a woman from Brazil who disappeared somewhere on the border. And I don't know what the outcome of that was, but it made me very nervous.
So you pay attention.
I do pay attention to that. And then other times I'm like, it's fine. Just go.
Intuition is a gift.
It is.
So tell me, in your travels, outline something for us that was the most surprising thing that you discovered.
I would have to say, well, there's two things. One that really stands out is just the kindness of strangers. People across the board, around the world, the majority of people are good-hearted people who are very generous and kind and curious and want to tell you their story. That's really surprising. I wasn't expecting that. I've traveled around even before having a bicycle, and I think there's a different experience with traveling on public transportation. It's almost like we don't quite have the connection. There was something about cycling that is very disarming to people. One of my first big bike ride was the Missouri-Kansas state line, basically the Mississippi River back to Durango. And I was just really surprised when I would knock on doors asking folks if I could camp in their pastures. I was really intentional about it. I'd knock on the door, I would take off my sunglasses and my helmet, and I would put the bicycle in plain sight and put my hands where they could see them and just be really polite and ask if I could camp in a pasture. I had a few people say, would you like to come inside? I mean, just out of the blue, and that was surprising. And then I had a few people who were leery, and I'd be like, okay, thank you though. And, so that was one thing that was surprising. But I also think that the bicycle, if I was the same person and I was hitchhiking with a backpack, I think people would have a very different response, because even though I'm with a bicycle, without a bicycle, I'm still kind of homeless. I think they see something different in their mind's eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't hold that against them, but I'd say overall is just the kindness of strangers and just how generous people can be. People have bought me meals.
I love that. I love that. It warms my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about people.
Yeah. Yeah. So Robin, in your blog, you noted that nature is harsh, but nature is beautiful. Is there a particular time that stands out for you during any one of your journeys where nature really stepped up and challenged you?
Oh yeah, lots of times. On the bicycle, certainly the wind. I've cycled east to west across the country twice, which is not a good idea. If you're considering that, I would say go west to east, because the prevailing winds are actually west to east. And so coming into central and western Kansas and that area of the country, the Midwest, just hit the winds. There's nothing that stops them. And
you needed a sail, Robin. You needed a sail.
I would have been tacking though, into the wind. You just can't do anything about the wind and certainly rain. And then, you know, as a mountaineer, being challenged by gravity, you know, there's nothing you can do about gravity and altitude. Now, I've never been a really high altitude mountaineer. I mean, I've climbed the 14ers in Colorado, and I've climbed a few volcanoes in Washington State. And certainly when I was in Lima, just hanging around in Juarez and some of the bicycle loops I did there, I was up at 13 or 14,000 feet. But altitude is tough, you know, and then as a guide, again, dealing with gravity, carrying a pack or whatever, you know, those are the real challenges. Rain, some wildlife, but I've never had only one scary encounter with wildlife, I think, in all my travels, and that was with a tiger snake in Australia. And they're just always mad. Tiger snakes are always pissed off. You just got to know that. And
avoid them.
yes, and I kind of snuck up on one. I didn't see it, and just kind of suddenly we were sort of eye to eye, you know, and it was pretty close, and it was getting into the striking position, and I talked to it and just backed away, and it gave it an out, and it just kind of took off up into the brush.
Wow.
I have some stories in my blog about that. There was a story about having to choose between crocodiles in the billabong or camping up higher on the bench, and it was all full of snakes. And it's, I think it's called That Which Does Not Kill Us Makes Us Stronger.
Makes us stronger. Yeah. Again, I'm just going to interject here. If anyone has not visited your blog, it's a must. I have enjoyed it so much.
Well, thank you.
So when you are not skiing, rock climbing, cycling, or something else like that, what else do you enjoy doing, Robin? I
read a lot of books. I'm an avid reader.
Well, as the library, we will really endorse that.
Yeah, I read a lot, and I play music. I play a guitar and harmonica, and I sing, and I do some entertaining. I'm a poet. I'm a storyteller. I love to cook. I have a dog. I hang out with my dog a lot, who just absconded out the door, actually. Luckily, he's down with a friend, and hopefully they won't get in too much trouble. But all that, you know, keeps me fairly busy, and I teach. I'm a teacher. Yeah. So.
Thank you. One of my questions was going to be to ask you to tell us where you've been, but I think as you make your way through your slideshow, that becomes pretty evident. So we'll leave that question out, and I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you at the end, when you get to the end of the slideshow, I'd like you to tell us what your next great adventure is going to be.
Okay.
All right.
And I just want to say that the slides don't really reflect all my travels. This is just like the last, I don't know, 10 years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, something like that.
Okay. Well, if you want to talk about that a little too, please feel free, because it's interesting.
Well, just that we traveled a lot when I was a kid. Like I said, my dad and my parents took us all over the place. And I think my first solo trip really was, I was about 19. And I flew from New York, where I grew up, to Tel Aviv, Israel, and I went to work on a kibbutz, and I picked oranges, and I worked in a little restaurant there. And then I traveled down to the Sinai and then into Egypt. And then after that, I met up with a friend of mine in Athens, and we hitchhiked across Europe together, and I played music in the streets, and I was a street musician. And then I enrolled in a Quaker college, actually. And part of the studies required that we spend 2 years in another culture, learn the language, learn the customs, culture, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that, and I spent several years in Central America. I also spent 9 months down in Dineta, the Navajo reservation, when I was in my 20s. That was really interesting. And then and then from there, I was off. Once I learned to speak Spanish, which I learned in Central America back in my 20s, it opened up a whole world for me. Mm-hmm. Language is so key for me, because it's really all about the people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to figure this out. Screen share
Yeah.
screen, right? Okay, I'm gonna hit that. Hit that. Oh, come on. Share that.
There you go, girl.
Hit play. There we go. Okay.
Nice job.
Thank you. Yeah, the computer is not my forte. I'm pretty new at this, so bear with me. So I read this somewhere. Helen Keller said, life is a daring adventure or it is nothing. And I agree. I'm not one to sit around and just wonder. I'd rather get out there and do it. And then T.S. Eliot, somebody said this to me in college 100 years ago. Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. So I think as a kid, my mother would attest to this. Pushing the envelope was what I was really good at. I'm sure it drove her crazy. But you know, the story she tells is, I learned to walk really young. I was really, really small, and she had to keep me on a leash because I was such a wanderer. And just this particular photo was an off-road bike ride I did in New Zealand a couple of years ago, and that's my trusty steed there. I name all my bicycles, by the way. That bicycle's name is Betty. Betty the Black Beast. I consider myself a pilgrim, a wanderer, a poet, an artist, a musician, and a student. I'm always learning something new. And my life, I didn't actually plan all this, but it just happened. I ended up as a guide and an adventure traveler. I just love it. And that photo there is Machu Picchu. I did that a couple of years ago with a friend of mine. We did a 4-day hike from, I forget where we started, but it was this whole supported trek. You can't do some of these hikes without guides anymore, which is good. Anyway, there I am at Machu Picchu. That was awesome. That was South America. Put it on your bucket list. And this is just a photo. Those two photos on the left are me at my office. I'm wearing an Open Sky t-shirt. I used to guide for them. And that on the lower left there is a canyon, just a random canyon somewhere in southern Utah. And that was pretty much my office. That was either a kiln or a fireplace in either a homestead or a ancient Puebloan structure. It's hard to say. And on the right there is just one of my other trusty steeds. As I said, I named my bicycle. That particular bike's name is Millie the Muckluck, which I bought to ride in snowy conditions, but it's also really fun. And that's actually at Salls Creek, which is just the other side of Bayfield. We have some really beautiful public lands here in the Southwest. Oh, and then I talked a little bit about a timeline. I talked a little bit about that already, but basically, eventually I ended up in, after I graduated from college, I ended up in California where I went to work in Yosemite National Park, waiting tables. And then that's where I kind of became a rock climber. And then we would get laid off right after we get laid off after Thanksgiving, and we'd be off for 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before Christmas. We'd all take off for Joshua Tree and climb, a group of friends and I. And then in January, on January 2nd, we got laid off for the whole season. We were off until April. And 1 year, I bought a ticket to Thailand. This was right when the internet was really becoming user-friendly, and I was messing around on a computer one day, and I just thought, maybe I'll buy a ticket to Asia. And I did, and I found a really good deal, and I just hit send. And so I was flying to Thailand, and once I got to Bangkok, I had to figure out what I was going to do. So I hung out in Thailand for about a month. Then I went to Vietnam. And at this time, I was just traveling by public transportation, taking buses and trains. And from Vietnam, I traveled from Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, depending on your perspective, overland to the border with China. And I actually walked across the border into China this was in 2000. And then I spent another month in China. That was really interesting, in the southwest of China, which was still very rural and somewhat provincial. But there again, you know, even with a language barrier, I found the people to be really interesting and kind. It was just so amazing. When I came back from Asia, I did a course with the National Outdoor Leadership School and got into the outdoor education field. And that was really where things kind of kicked off. So eventually I went to graduate school. I got a master's degree in counseling psychology. And in 2005, I joined the Red Cross right after Hurricane Katrina. And I spent time in southern Mississippi and New Orleans after the hurricane. That was also fascinating. I spent about 3 weeks down there. And I just kept going whenever a door opened, I would walk through it. And I would eventually go back to Europe, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I mean, and that was, let's see, that was 2005 that I was in southern Mississippi, and a lot's happened since. So I want to talk about why traveling, why it's good, why I feel that it's important for me. And at the top of the list there is it creates kinship with strangers. And I think that's really an important aspect of the world we live in. You know, that we live in this world of people who are just afraid of everything. And when I can reach out to somebody completely different from myself and have a conversation that doesn't even include necessarily spoken language, I feel like we've created a bridge across cultures. In some regards, I'm an ambassador, because we all hear about the boorish Americans traveling all over the world and being loud and obnoxious. And to be fair, some of them are like that. I'm trying to break that stereotype. And the feedback I get is I'm doing a pretty good job. And learning a new language is good exercise for the brain. I'm always practicing my Spanish and learning new things. Traveling opens the mind to possibility. You know, we live in this culture that's very, I think, rigid, and we all kind of get stuck and can't see beyond ourselves. And breaking down barriers between cultures, getting to know each other, gets us out of our comfort zone. And I believe that humans are nomadic by nature. I'm not sure that we were really built for a sedentary life. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that. In fact, Robin Davidson, who wrote that book Tracks about the trip across Australia, published another article in an Australian magazine about pastoral people versus agricultural cultures and how they have had different impacts on various environments. And then, of course, ultimately, when you travel, you never know who you're going to meet. For example, meet Miss Agnes Rhodes KEESLING. She went by Aggie. I met her when I was cycling across Kansas on a really hot, humid day. I saw a lake on my map, and I pedaled kind of out of my way up to this lake, and there was a little cafe and a little marina, and this woman was sitting there eating a burger, and she saw me standing there. Waitress brought me an ice cold glass of soda water with ice and lemon. I sat down, and this woman, Agnes, was sitting at another table, just invited me to sit with her. You know, she's wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt, which I think is hilarious. She was in her 80s, it turned out, and she invited me to her home and started telling me a story of her life. She had worked at the Parsons Ammunitions Plant in 1946. She was 18 years old. She worked there with her mother. That was considered good work back in those days. Kind of a Rosie to the Riveter type. And in her hand there, she's holding a 37 millimeter mortar. Obviously, it's not live. And then she told me that her mother, Mickey Rhodes, lost one of her fingers when she was installing a detonator, and it went off in her hand. So these are the kinds of people that I meet. And what I find is that people just want to tell you their stories. She also had, she had also planted several butterfly gardens in the area. She was kind of well known as being an environmentalist and a troublemaker. That's how she called herself, a troublemaker. And Kansas, for people who don't know, is known as the monarch state because the monarchs migrate right down through the middle of it. And with the advent of farming and especially industrial agriculture, a lot of the ecosystems that the butterflies rely on are disappearing. So she has been really active in planting butterfly gardens. I just thought it was really interesting person. I spent 2 days with her. She had a little boat on her little lake. She was a little bit nervous about driving it because she hadn't driven it in so long. So I offered to take her for a spin around the lake, and we did. It was great. We had a good time, made her day. And this is another family that I met. This is down in Guatemala. That is Doña Merlina and her 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, and her daughter-in-law. And I stayed with them in a little village in northern Guatemala on a bike trip several years ago. I cycled from Cancun to Guatemala City. So down through Yucatan, across Belize, across northern Guatemala, and into the city center. And this was a homestay, and I got to hear her story. Really interesting people. Again, her people had been up there, I don't know, 10,000 years, 8,000 years. The local dialect was a language called Itza. And this was an area called Petén Itza and Lake Petén, really. And I attended a language school there just to brush up on my Spanish. This is the inside of Doña Merlina's house. Now, mind you, the economy in that part of the world wasn't very good. However, Doña Merlina had an immaculate kitchen. This is her kitchen, which was basically, the house was carved out of rock with a tin roof. And she hosted 3 or 4 students there at any one time. And the house was really funky. Her husband was the town plumber. So they had running water. And so they could offer accommodation to students to one of the many language schools. The photo on the upper right there is their kitchen. One of them, they had 2. But that's where they cooked. It was a shed that was kind of separate from the rest of the house, and they cooked on wood. And then in the lower right there is a hibiscus growing in Doña Merlina's garden. Interesting thing about this area is that it was so far removed from the central government that any money that came from the government out to the outlying municipalities was often just kind of stolen by the local dignitaries. And the mayor of this town pretty much just skimmed everything off the top, and none of the municipal workers were really getting paid in cash. So they had their own local economy based on barter. So Doña Merlina and her daughters, they took in laundry, they hosted students, they were raising some pork. There was actually a little yard in the back with this giant pig, and they sold the piglets for meat. And they traded. And since her husband was the town plumber, they had water, and they would exchange services for other goods. It was just interesting how people learn to live when there isn't much. But she was considered a wealthy woman, and she was really, really kind. And I just really enjoyed staying with them. This gentleman and his lovely wife, this is Che Wan, the other side of the planet. This is in Kuala Lumpur. He was a real character, this guy. This is a bike shop that he ran by himself, and he was essentially taking the designs of well-known big name companies like Surly and Salsa and Specialized, and pretty much stealing their designs and building his own bicycles. And that's his lovely wife. He didn't speak a lot of English. He spoke Bahasa Malay, which is the language of Malaysia. But his lovely wife, whose name I can't remember, she spoke English really well. And she worked in a pharmacy. And she was lovely. How should I say this? Malaysia is a Muslim country, but it is very liberal. And the wearing of the face covering is actually something women do by choice that is not forced on them in Malaysia. And these were just more traditional. And I believe they told me this was actually an arranged marriage as well. But she was really lovely and he was a real character. And I stayed with him in Kuala Lumpur a couple of times on my way in and out of the country. And this is just wildlife. I'm intrigued by wildlife. This is in the jungle. I went to Malaysia twice in the same year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That critter there is a golden orb weaver, mostly harmless, as long as you don't piss it off, make it angry. And they build these huge, beautiful webs. We have a similar species here in the States. It's not nearly that big, but nonetheless, it's a beautiful spider, and the webs are pretty fantastic. And these are just some quirky photos. The kid on the left, this was just in an airport. I'm drawn to the quirky. So I took a photo of this kid. He's listening to music. And I guess the hood on his jacket, like I've never seen that before, just covered up his head, and it just made me laugh. And then on the right there is, this is in Kuala Lumpur at the main mosque in the city. And this woman that I'm standing with was a docent, and she offered to show me around. And they ask you to wear a long gown when you go into the mosque. As a show of respect, I don't have a problem with that. Anyway, she said to me in her broken English, "You're American?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "One of my favorite pop singers is American. Do you know David Cassidy?" That just made me laugh. Of all the random pop singers that she could have mentioned, that was the last one I think I would have ever thought of. And anyway, just on the bottom there is, those are irises that are used as an herb and a spice in Malaysia. And this is a trip I took up into the jungle. There's a big national park up there called Tamar Negara that I stayed in. It's really beautiful. It's one of the last remaining old growth stands of jungle in all of Southeast Asia. And Tamar Negara was actually established by the British. It's one of the oldest national parks in the world. There were some bird blinds back in that jungle there that I visited, spent the night in one of the bird blinds just to hear the birds. It was spectacular. The only way to get there is by going up the river here. It took me 2 days to get from Kuala Lumpur up to this national park, but it was stunning. And these are various marinas on the river to get people across to Tamar Negara. So beautiful. So, in thinking about travel overall, I kind of tend to think of it as a pilgrimage of sorts. And I have some spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices. And I think that traveling really helps put me in touch with God, whatever that is, just through the people I meet and just how the world looks. The world is beautiful. The natural world that we inhabit is just so stunning. If we take the time to look, you know. And this says the world is the abode of God, and God truly lives in the world. And I absolutely believe that. In every blade of grass, every leaf that is falling, there's leaves falling outside my window right now, every little fish, every little insect, even the annoying mosquito. That's kind of my take on it. And being in touch with that, those are the Rockies, by the way, in case anybody's wondering. That's the, what's that called? The Collegiate Range. This is up in, out of Buena Vista. I have some friends up there. And this is an actual pilgrimage that I did. I walked the Camino de Santiago a couple of times, twice. From Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is Western France, over the Pyrenees and into northern Spain. The first time I did it, I did the first 2/3 of it on a bicycle. And by the time I got to Leon, I realized I was kind of missing out by being on a bicycle. It's really much better as a walk, I thought. So I went back and did it again. There's a quote on the bottom left there. It's part of a poem by Antonio Machado, who's a Spanish poet. And it says, "Caminante, no hay camino, se hace camino al andar." And that loosely translates to, for the walker or walker, there is no road. You make the road as you go. And that just sort of reaffirms the idea that it's not really the destination that we're after, but the journey of getting from here to there, and that's what I think. I will throw a dart at a map and think or say to myself, I'm going to go there. And then I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? And then I start sort of putting the pieces together. And my second trip to Spain there, I bought a one-way ticket to Paris from Washington, D.C., where I was visiting my brother, and kind of figured it out when I got there. Flew to Paris, hung around in Paris for a while, a couple days, and then took the train down south first to Bordeaux, and then from Bordeaux up into the Pyrenees on the French side, and then pretty much was just winging it. I met a lot of people. I spent, on this particular trip, I had also arranged to volunteer at a pilgrim's hostel in a small village about 10 days walk in. So I walked for 10 days, arrived at this village, and then spent 2 weeks as a hospitalera, they call us, we provide hospitality to pilgrims. And I basically lived in a 900-year-old church for 2 weeks up in the belfry, just greeting pilgrims. We provided a place for them to wash their clothes. We provided a place for them to sleep, and a kitchen. And we stocked the kitchen with groceries, and 1 or 2 or 3 pilgrims would cook a meal every night for everybody else. And I kept a list of the nationalities I met. And in the end, I counted meeting 52 separate nationalities while I was a pilgrim in Spain. And after my 2 weeks were up, I continued walking to the coast, all the way to the coast across northern Spain. And it was, I think I spent a total of 52 days walking, because I was taking my time, kind of just like Antonio Machado said, un andando, kind of ambling rather than trucking. I love Spain. I'd go back there in a heartbeat. And my philosophy is to take the road less traveled and get off the beaten path. And this photo actually is in Baja. I did a ride there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I might have a destination in mind, but if something draws my attention, I will go there. I try not to stick too rigidly to a plan unless I have to catch a plane or something, in which case I have to catch a plane. Anyway, this was one of my rides. I rode from San Francisco to Durango. That tree on the left is a bristlecone pine. That particular tree right there is about 3,000 years old. There's one tiny little grove in Nevada. I was on a bike ride, San Francisco to Durango, when I discovered them in the Great Basin National Park. I crossed Nevada on a bicycle by myself. And that is not for the faint of heart. I crossed Nevada and southern Utah. Excuse me, I think my dog is at the door. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Also, a pilgrimage by bicycle. The US is beautiful. I'll just say the states are incredible. And that's just the Southwest. Again, the weird and wonderful, what's the word I'm looking for? This is This was a sculpture out in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. Yeah, Model T maybe with a horse in there. Somebody wrote horse with no name and somebody else scribbled out name and put in Maine because that horse didn't have a mane. That horse didn't have much. Pile of bones. Whimsical, that's the word. The weird and whimsical. I love it. This was just a trip across the Southwest. A lot of that is Utah. Coming over Moldes Pass. Yes, I did that. More of Utah, seen from the seat of a bicycle. I'm particularly enamored with the deserts. I grew up in the Northeast and it's beautiful, but I find that the deserts are more mystical. I have neighbors that listen to rancheria music really loud when they drive by. I love it. More of Utah. This was on that ride. I crossed southern Utah on a bicycle by myself. And it was so stunning, just amazing. And then I spent 4 years going back and forth to Central and South America. Those are the Andes from the saddle of my bicycle. Just spectacular. I just couldn't put in all the slides. There was just so many photos. One of my little adventures in South America was I cycled from Lima to the city of RHODES. I talked about that earlier. And I cycled up the coast. And once I got to the coast, you pretty much turn right and start pedaling up into the mountains. And what I hadn't realized was how many switchbacks there was from sea level to 13,000 feet to where I needed to get to this pass. And after about 3 days of that, I hitchhiked about the last 20 miles because it was just so incredibly steep. And I was standing outside this village and this pickup truck pulled in and 2 nuns got out of the pickup. One much older woman and much younger one. The younger one was driving. It was a brand new pickup. And they were going to eat lunch in some little cafe. And I begged them for a ride. And the younger one said, well, I need to ask the mother. She had the Mother Superior with her in the truck. I need to ask. And so she did. And the Mother Superior was like, yes, of course, we'll give you a ride. So I threw my bike in the back of this truck, which had about 25 cases of wine in it, in boxes. And they had gone to get wine for their convent, which was up in the mountains. And they gave me a ride to the pass. Otherwise, I don't think I would have made it. This is just some shots of Guatemala. On the left there is an old colonial finca, which means farm in Spanish, where they had their own little chapel. I volunteered there for a couple of weeks, helping them with their website. They were trying to establish an ecotourism site. And then on the right there, this was an interesting place. This was an eco resort that was founded by former guerrilla fighters. Most people don't know that Guatemala was embroiled in a civil war for probably close to 40 years. Very repressive government that was supported in part by the United States because of it was rubber, bananas, sugar, coffee, and chocolate. Central America was known for a long time as the dessert countries because of those things. And anyway, at one point, Guatemala elected a democratic socialist named Arbenz. I think it was in the 50s. And he wanted to give a lot of the land back to the peasants and the indigenous people, and it caused this uprising, and it triggered this civil war that went on for years and years and years. And finally, in 96, they signed a peace treaty. Indigenous people never did get their land back, but anyway, this particular group of former guerrillas were trying to establish an eco resort, and they had a little school there. And that particular band of guerrillas was led by a woman named Capitana Maria. And this whole place was a monument to her and her leadership in the war. it's just a fascinating history, that part of the world. Most people don't know that. I spent some time down there in the 80s as a student looking at it very closely, and it's pretty harsh. This is Guatemala again. There's a pyramid. In northern Guatemala, southern Mexico, throw a rock, you'll hit a pyramid. And on the right there is Semana Santa. I actually have video of this. This is amazing. This goes on for 5 days in Antigua, where they pull out these, I forget what they call them. They're like barges. And they have all these figures and different scenarios based on the Bible and the crucifixion. And they carry these things through the streets of Antigua. And these gentlemen in the purple are parts of there's different guilds, and they pay a certain fee and they get to partake in this big celebration in Antigua. This goes on for 5 days. There's 2 places left in Latin America where they do this. Antigua, Guatemala is one of them. And I think there's a city in Ecuador where they do this. And it is a big deal. There are thousands of people in the street. And these guys start at 5 in the morning. And about every 20 minutes, they'll switch out carrying one of these big barges. I have videos of those barges weigh a couple thousand pounds each. And these guys just stand right together and carry these things down the street on their shoulders. It's a pretty impressive sight. Shots of the world. This is a trip through Baja. This was off-road. I did 1,700 miles off-road in Baja. You asked me about, did I ever feel unsafe? And I was one of the first people to do this particular route in Baja before the locals really knew what we were doing. And I never felt unsafe down there. I hid myself really well in the brush where I was camping. I camped pretty much every night out in the desert. Nobody ever bothered me. I hardly ever saw anybody. But Baja, California, the interior is essentially probably one of my favorite places on the planet. This is a map of that route. It actually starts in Tecate, goes down through the mountains, and then kind of zigzags back and forth across the country. 87 days it took me to do that. I could have done it faster. I probably could have done it in a month, but why hurry? That's my philosophy. And there's my trusty steed. That's the one that took me down through Baja and would take me all the way over to Australia. This is just a photo of a cardone cactus, a relative of the saguaro. It lives a long time, a couple of 100 years. And my bicycle is down at the base of that tree. When I parked my bicycle there and I took that photo, I realized just how big these trees are. They do consider them trees, and there's a wooden skeleton on the inside that was harvested for a long time for building, but it put the saguaro, the cardone in danger. So the government it's now illegal to harvest these trees for wood. They're so beautiful. And this is the desert. It's just so stunning down there. So quiet. There's a cardone forest. Those are the salt flats on the west side of Baja. This is a small town down around the middle of Baja, kind of in the center there where they harvest salt. And they have a number of desalination plants for water. There's a lot of agriculture actually in Baja now because of the climate. A lot of these big hoop houses where our hothouse tomatoes and peppers come from, a lot of it is down here coming from Baja. There's a few places that are growing organically, but sadly, a lot of those hoop houses become abandoned and there's just miles and miles of plastic blowing around out there in the desert. That was a friend I met on the road, Terry the Tarantula, or Tereso, if you will. And then I went to Australia. I finally got to Australia all those years later. And these are bike routes that I found this website online, and this gentleman wrote all these routes and published this website. I didn't do all these, but I did a few of them. And I fell in love with Australia. So Robin Davidson, who took the camels across Australia, she started there in the center where it says Plenty Donahue and the Marini Loop. And she basically walked from there due west across that Western Australia there, which one of the driest continents on the planet. But I loved it. I fell in love. So I did the Murray River Trail down on the southeast. I did the Mawson Trail there, just to the west of the Murray River. I did a little section of the Oodnadatta track, and then I hitchhiked up to Alice Springs. I did some loops around Uluru, and then rode up there to the north and did the Give River Road. And then I ended up spending too much time up in the northwest, was running out of time, and had to fly down to Perth, where I rode that Mundabiddi Trail in the southwest and that southwest coast route. That was amazing. I rode to Tasmania. Oops, a little quick. So I got to visit every state in Australia. I spent a year, all told, I think I spent about 16 months in Australia. And there's the ubiquitous Didge player. And there's my trusty steed again, and me. Just some shots of, that's the southwest coast there. On the other side of the horizon there is Antarctica. That's called the Southern Ocean. And the water is really, really cold. I swam in it a few times and I lasted about 5 minutes. And there's the Joey. Everybody, if you ever get to Australia, you got to hold a Joey. You just cannot hold a Joey. These are kangaroo rescues. That critter on the left there, that is known as an echidna. Australia is host to some of the world's weirdest and most wonderful wildlife. The echidna is actually an egg-laying mammal. Yeah, lays an egg, egg hatches, and then it raises it like a mammal. So it nurses it and takes care of it. It's got kind of a aardvark nose, a bird beak, and quills like a porcupine. And then on the lower right are the camels. So they brought camels to Australia back in the, I think, mid 1800s to build rail lines. They discovered that camels were more effective in Australia's deserts than horses were. Go figure. So they brought in all these AGGIES, believe it or not, and their camels to help build some of these railways. And over the years, the camel came into disuse. And a lot of them were just turned loose. And Australia, believe it or not, now has the world's largest wild camel herd anywhere else in the world. There's millions of them out there. This particular bunch is a tame camel train that they take people out on the beach. Yeah, it's just so weird to see camels in Australia. This is a road train. This is just, I was fascinated by these are the big trucks that pull 3 full-length trailers, you know, like our 18-wheelers. And it's got that barricade on the front because they don't stop for anything. So there's no fences in Australia for the big, they call them stations, the ranches, the cow ranches, and sheep ranches. They're just called stations. Like some of them are the size of Rhode Island. But the highways go right through the middle of them and there's no fences. And cows will be out on the road and these trucks just go right through them without even stopping. So every now and again, I came across we'll call it a ghost herd. Yeah, just scattered bones. Anyway, I just took a photo because I was so fascinated by it. People told me I should be afraid, but I was never afraid of these guys because I could hear them coming behind me from like, I don't know, 4 miles away. I was in New Zealand. New Zealand is beautiful. It's raw. It's cold. But you know, oddly enough, I was much more enamored with Australia because I think because of the deserts. Australia, I don't know. New Zealand's like fairyland. That's where they filmed the Hobbit movies, and you can see why. But I wanted to go back to Australia. I spent about 9 weeks in New Zealand. cycling on both the North and the South Island. The South Island was getting cold when I was there. And I have some friends that live there now. They emigrated from the States to New Zealand. Then I went back to Australia in July and October, from July through October, to work with Sea Shepherd. I got involved in a ocean conservation bunch. This is the SS Steve Irwin, excuse me, the MY Steve Irwin. There's a show on television called Whale Wars. I've never seen it, but Sea Shepherd is a volunteer ocean conservation organization that goes after illegal whalers and illegal fishing boats. Australia is very protective and proud of its marine life and its oceans and its beaches. And there was a gentleman who came from Greenpeace. Paul Watson is his name. And he founded Sea Shepherd. I guess maybe he felt that Greenpeace wasn't doing enough. Started his own little organization and got in a lot of trouble with several other nation states for messing with their whaling ships and their fishing fleets. He's American, I believe. Anyway, I went to work for them. I worked in their galley as the chef. I was a vegan cook. All the ships are vegan, so I learned a lot about that. I lived on this boat for about 7 weeks, I think. We sailed up the coast from Melbourne, actually Williamstown, which is just outside of Melbourne, all the way up into Queensland, protecting, or I should say, supporting an anti-mining coalition. There was a big coal mine that was slated for central Queensland for this gentleman from India, I guess. His name was Gautama Adani. And he had gotten permission from the Australian government to dig this open pit coal mine. The problem, of course, was that coal is really dirty. Also, he wanted to slurry this coal from central Queensland up to the coast, a few hundred miles across some pretty pristine Queensland desert and forest. Part of the problem also was that the port, there's a place called Point Abbott, where there's this huge coal port. A lot of that coal dust is blowing into the ocean. And that particular area on the coast is home to the northern third of the Great Barrier Reef, which is struggling. Warming water, various chemicals being introduced to the ocean, and coal dust is bleaching the coral. And as a result, all these little towns on the coast that are supported through ecotourism are in danger of just pretty much drying up. So we were supporting these communities that were opposing this huge coal mine. And there we are. Don't wreck the reef. That was us. I'm actually down there in that photo, down in the middle somewhere. That was the crew, and that was amazing. So like I said, going back to, if a door opens, I just walk through it, or, only those who will risk going too far. And I saw kind of an opening in a door, and I just kept going and going and going. My philosophy really is just keep going until they tell you to stop. People have asked me about when I pick camp spots. Sometimes I camp in people's pastures. There's nobody around to ask. I throw my bike over the fence, and I just keep going until somebody tells me to stop or nothing happens. And I've never had a problem. And nobody's ever bothered me. Nobody's ever shot at me. That's the other thing about Australia. I felt safer there because they don't really have any guns to speak of. I mean, they do. The ranchers carry long guns for, putting down animals that are injured, but they don't have the same kind of violence that we do. So I never worried about gun violence. And there I am on the bow of the Steve, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean on a very calm day, very calm evening. And then after 7 weeks on the ship, I disembarked up in the north and I rode my bicycle back to Sydney. And along the way, I stopped in a few national parks and finally, at long last, saw a koala in the wild. This is an endangered species now. And they're the weirdest looking things I've ever seen. They're really weird looking. They have huge claws like Freddy Krueger. And they can get pretty aggressive. This particular feller startled me. I was just walking on a trail in a national park and I heard some movement in the leaf litter. And I looked over and there he was, and he just kind of started scampering up this eucalyptus tree. And he stopped to look and I looked at him and he just kind of went on with his business. I don't know if you can see the claws there in this photo, but they have some very dangerous claws and they do damage. They will eviscerate animals, people, whatever. Some of you might have seen the videos of the fires the last few months, and these guys sadly were decimated by the fires. And this was just on my trip back to Sydney, Australia on my bicycle. That is northern New South Wales. Again, it's such beautiful country. It's like fairyland. The weird and the whimsical there on the left, I don't know, that was in somebody's yard. You don't see that every day. On the top right is one of my camps there in Queensland. And then on the coast, there's like, I don't know, 10 or what they tell me, 15,000 miles of coastline in Australia, and it's all different. Then I was off to India. That's my bicycle in a box in the back of a tuk-tuk. And this was my lovely driver, who was very kind. I believe he was a Sikh. I'm not sure. They are from Punjab, I believe. Anyway, he was a nice guy. He was very, very helpful. This was in Delhi. From Delhi, I went up north, and I got involved in an animal rescue. Again, just by chance, there was some shaggy dog on the beach. Down there on the right, there is the Mother Ganges River up near the headwaters in the city of Rishikesh. And those are temples in the background. And this dog, shaggy, muddy, wet dog, just sidled up to me and I pet it, and it was wearing a tag around its neck for an organization called Karma Animal Trust. And I found them on Facebook because the tag said, find us on Facebook. So I did. Turns out they needed volunteers. So I went and hung out with them. And this little calf on the left is one of their chargés, one of the street animals that they would go out and look after every day. And I got to know them. Here are some of my friends from Rishikesh who I hung out with daily. I love these guys. They're really friendly for the most part. And these dogs are all looked after. Even though they're street dogs, they're taken care of by this Karma Animal Trust. There's a veterinarian and a couple of assistants that have a spay and neuter program. And if anybody's injured on the streets, they take care of them on the streets. If they're really sick, they bring them in and kind of keep them in their little clinic until they're well again. And that's where I found this guy, Nayak. He was a member of a litter, really, really young puppies that were just dumped by the side of the river. And this Karma Animal Trust was looking after them. They'd go and check on them every day. But then this guy and one of his siblings had been attacked by something, some larger animal, dogs, maybe monkeys, I don't know. And he was injured really badly. He was full of puncture wounds and they got infected, and he was infected with maggots. It was gross. They ended up amputating one of his feet. And I met him and I started fostering him. And then I ended up adopting him. And so from northern India, where I think I spent 2.5 months in India with several animal rescues, I ended up keeping him, and we went up to McLeod Ganj, which is way up in the north. This is the seat of the Tibetan government in exile, the town of McLeod Ganj, which is up above Dharamshala, up in the north. And then I lived in a little village that was even higher than McLeod Ganj, and those are the mountains there behind the city. So we spent a couple of weeks here while Nayuk was growing till he was old enough to fly. This is at His Holiness's temple. The Dalai Lama lives up here, and this is outside his temple. And there are Tibetan exiles and refugees everywhere. I loved this part of India. Such a different culture from the Hindu. And there's Nayuk. Here we are back in America several years later, and here we are at Hovenweep. This was kind of the end of that big, long journey. My intention was to cycle around the world from India up through Nepal and across Central Asia into Europe, but this guy stole my heart. So that was the end of that after, let's see, what was that, 3 years? 3 years on the bicycle. I called it quits and came back, and now I'm on to the next adventure. This is in La Platas. This is just this fall. This is a couple of weeks ago. That's my new trusty steed. That's a fat tire cargo bike. Oh, I love it. And that's Nayuk there on the left. Stay tuned for more adventures. Thanks for looking at my slides.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
I just want to make sure everybody knows how to get in touch with you if they have questions or comments. So your blog, they can Google you, but you're kind of elusive if that happens. Your blog is Freewheeling Femme. And
Yep.
is there anything else you'd like to leave as a contact if folks wanted to get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's free. Just I should have made a slide for that. It's Freewheeling Femme, freewheelingfemme.blogspot.com. That's FEM, Freewheeling FEM, Femme. Yeah, they can email me also. And boy, I should have made a slide for that. You can find me on Facebook. Also, my email address is obinjatu, TOO@gmail.com.
Spell that out, because I had a hard time with it originally, please.
Sorry, it's OBINJATOO, Obinjatu, as an also, at gmail.com.
Well, Robin, I can't thank you enough. And it was sure worth waiting a year to get you here.
Yeah, it was fun doing this. This is like I said, this was my first attempt at this. I think I'm going to keep telling stories and figuring out how to put this to some of my music.
Absolutely. I think that would be great. And what's the next big adventure?
The next big adventure is my partner and I have purchased a funky old travel van, a road trek. And we're going to quit our jobs in January for the rest of the winter and go woof somewhere in the south, someplace warm.
Awesome.
I want to grow worms and compost, and we want to grow vegetables and just do something different.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can check back with you in a year and do another one of these.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for joining us, Robin.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.